Spratton Hall School, 1960 to 1964. 2 months before my 9th birthday, I was sent as a full boarder to Spratton Hall Preparatory School. It was a sad day as we drove there. The headmaster quickly put me into the hands of a shepherd, an older boy who didn't really want the job, which was to whisk me off so that my parents could make a clean exit. I remember trying with limited success to suppress the tears as he showed me around the school. The only time when tears could be safely shed, however, and then only in silence, was after lights out. The headmaster, Kenneth Hunter, had bought Spratton Hall and opened it up as a boarding school in 1951. He created the school logo from the story of the patron saint of hunters, Saint Hubertus, who was out hunting and came upon a stag with a crucifix between its antlers. This experience apparently changed his life. I made a friend named Simon Law, and one day the headmaster's wife, Joan Hunter, took us to one side and gave us 2 packets of seeds, and then walked us over to the gardens where she allotted a square of land for us to plant them in. Here are extracts from letters written home by me during the first term. April the 30th, 1960. Dear Mummy and Daddy, it is the royal wedding on the 6th of May, and we can go home on Thursday evening for the weekend. I am very happy. I have lots of friends. We have to have a green shirt. Please will you send me one? We have dormitories. I am in Kent. We wake up at 7:30, then we have to wash and get dressed, then we have breakfast, and then we go to class and have lessons, Latin, French, sums and writing. Love from Christopher. May the 8th, 1960. Dear Mummy and Daddy, we broke up school on Thursday. Grandpa and Grandma came for me. On the way we stopped an ice cream man and had one each. I've had the ladder to climb the cedar tree. I made a tent and we played at army camps. And afterwards I went to Mrs. Haynes dressed up as a soldier. Love from Christopher. June the 11th, 1960. Dear Mummy and Daddy, please will you thank Grandma and Grandpa for the cake and the writing case. When I saw the cake, I took it to the cook, and they took it out underneath. I saw a bag and opened the bag and saw the writing case. It is very useful for me for letters. I had a very exciting day on Friday. The boys gave me 10 off from the changing room, and I ran as fast as I could, but they caught me in the end and bumped me. I invited everybody in my dormitory and some from Edinburgh dormitory. Love from Christopher. June the 25th, 1960. Dear Daddy and Mummy, I have had a very nice time swimming at the weekend and on school days. I am getting autographs from boys and masters. I went for a walk on Friday. We walked into the countryside, and when we got to the bridge we threw sticks in and watched them go through to the other side. Love from Christopher. July the 21st, 1960. My darling Christopher, it was so nice to see you for the day yesterday. Daddy, Elizabeth and I enjoyed looking around with you at the school. I know it was disappointing that you did not stay up for the barbecue last evening. However, it had still not begun when we left at 9 p.m. So you see, it was not long after you went in for bed that we started our journey home. We had a nice journey and were back here by 11 p.m. Elizabeth slept most of the time. All my love. God bless, Mummy. I remember an open day that the school had organised to raise money for a tennis court. Mum, Dad and Elizabeth came, which was lovely, but the set bedtime for our dormitory came before the guests left. I remember watching from the Kent dormitory window as they were leaving and being unable to attract their attention to say goodbye. I felt very sad. I recall the dormitory prefects telling us that they did not want to hear any noise from the time that they came to bed. I remember lying very stiffly in bed, not daring to move, lest the squeaky springs gave me away. Needing and wanting to turn over, but not daring to. I was also afraid that my breathing would be heard, and so restricted it by breathing in a very shallow way, and by holding my breath for as long as possible. This went on night after night for months. One particular night I awoke in the early hours to the sound of the metal waste paper bin falling over next to my bed. Looking over, I saw a large brown rat transporting orange peel to its hole by a radiator on the other side of the room. I froze for quite some time, and then plucked up courage to call out the prefect's name, which was Osler. Eventually he woke up, and I told him what was happening, and he told me from the safety of his top bunk to shut up and go back to sleep. I went back into a petrified state, not daring to sleep, until the matron, Mrs. Clark, walked in to wake us up. I told her what was happening. She screamed, slammed the door, and ran up the stairs to her room. Looking back, I wonder how the other boys in the dormitory received the orders that the prefects gave us. Somehow I doubt if they all interpreted the no noise rule in the same way that I did. I took it literally, and I was so afraid of the consequences of breaking the rules that we had been given. There were two gangs at the school, one comprising the boarders, led by Philip Norman Jones, whose speciality was dares, such as running down to the swimming pool naked, and the other comprising the day boys, led by Simon Tukey. They were often at war, and as a boarder I was expected to follow Norman Jones, although I never wholeheartedly committed myself to his gang. There were two eccentrics called Jollis, who the headmaster seemed to hate for some reason, and Brooke Taylor, who I believe was related to Tim the Goody. They would organise a game called Flick Charlie, which I found quite amusing. It was very simple and only involved flicking with a 1-foot ruler a plastic tortoise named Charlie across the desk and back again. Dad's holidays from Lichfield Theological College did not coincide with my school holidays, so it was agreed that I would take a week off from school as long as I spent the morning studying. We went to the hut near Morton in Dorset, a wooden bungalow owned by a religious order. On the site is a chapel, and so Dad took the opportunity of leading evensong, which we all attended, and Mum said that he would make a really nice vicar. Mr. Hunter also hated fatties, who he referred to as fat slobs. Inevitably this attitude descended through the ranks, and it was usually the fatties and me who were the outcasts. A favourite pastime for the athletic Victor Ladorum, or whatever they were called, team captains, was to look at someone like me while selecting a team and ask, "What's your name?" And I would fall for it every time, expecting to be picked and responding enthusiastically, only to be told with a smile, "Oh, that's interesting," and be left standing there the subject of much mirth as the selection process continued. As usual, I was then left until the end, when the captains would argue over who was not going to have me on their team. However, all of this must have made me quite determined, because I did once find myself overtaking everyone in a cross-country run, only running out of steam 10 yards from the finish and coming second. And then I was once surprisingly picked for the Colts rugby team against Oundle School. However, the once should be emphasised after Mr. Hunter told the whole school that I had been a passenger throughout the match. My favourite sport, though, was swimming, and those sunny summer mornings when Mr. Hunter would come into the dormitory at 6 a.m. inviting us to join him in the school swimming pool. As with all private schools at this time, there was still a sense that pupils were being trained to work throughout the British Empire, despite the fact that it was rapidly diminishing in the 1960s. We were taught to stand on our own feet, and thus capable of being shipped out, for example, to the Indian subcontinent as district commissioners. To emphasise this sense of empire, the 3 houses at Spratton were Drake, Raleigh and Grenville, the Armada being heralded as the first British victory, although there is some considerable doubt about this viewpoint, on the road to the creation of the British Empire. The teachers hired by the headmaster were a mixed bunch. Captain Carnahan, from whom we developed a cartoon character which appeared in our underground magazine, with stories ranging from Carnahan at the Carnival to Carnahan wins the Gymkhana at the Carnegie Hall. Mr. Lawless, who called me the senior curate, and Simon Law the junior curate. Then there was Mr. Kerwin, who, if you hadn't learnt all the history dates set, would take you for a Chinese bicycle ride which involved lifting you off the ground by the hair on your temple. Mr. Wilson, who taught Latin, and Mr. Adamson, who taught maths, were fair and good teachers. Our French teacher, Mr. Tattersall, obviously found small boys quite tiresome, and would often in sheer exasperation exclaim, "Take a bit of trouble, will you?" The local rector, Dennis Pettit, appropriately taught religious studies. He knew our every move and precisely who was the culprit at any one time, which was amazing, as he was totally blind. A favourite pastime for me was the building of underground dens and tunnels in the woods. There was already an air of mystery in this place with its ruined chapel, from which there was supposed to be a tunnel running into the school cellar. And to prove it, there was a bricked-up archway in that cellar. Dormitory life was varied. There were the midnight feasts, comprising cakes, chocolates and biscuits, which had come in parcels from home, and now equally divided on the bathroom floor. One at a time we would collect our share, until the headmaster arrived to find out why so many people needed the bathroom. Then the queue formed outside his study instead, and comics were hastily put into pyjama trousers in case he decided to administer Jim a plimsoll. Every 2 years Mr. Hunter purchased a new pair. In Cumberland Dormitory, I remember dreaming that I wanted to pass water, but could not open the door to get to the bathroom. I was so desperate that I urinated there. In the early hours I awoke, and remembering the dream, went over to the door with my torch, but there was no puddle. So I got back into bed, and then realised that it was soaking wet. I did not dare tell anyone about this, and so slept in a sodden bed and pyjamas for several nights. Then there were the escapes from Lancaster and York dormitories. Conveniently, a fire escape ran from these dormitories, so escape was made easier, except that the cleaners had left their mops and buckets halfway down the stairs. Amazingly, the clatter was not heard, and so we continued, walking to a nearby village, and back in the moonlight. Some of us would put on plays. One year I wrote an adventure about a group of children who encounter a group of gypsies, very famous 5. In the holidays Dad kindly helped me by typing it out as I dictated it. I even found a record of gypsy music for the interval. But the boy whose record player we were using insisted that his Beach Boys record should be played instead. In the second half, Mr. Hunter came storming round the back of the stage and accosted the boy who was playing a baddie. Apparently he had brought a real knife onto the stage and was brandishing it. Anyway, despite all that, the headmaster was very complimentary about my efforts, and did me the honour of driving me to the bus stop for my journey home for the weekend. Abington, Northampton, 1961 to 1964. Dad's curacy took place at Abington Church, and having moved to Northampton I became a weekly boarder at Spratton. On the music side of things, the promise of recorder classes did not materialise, so I learnt to play the soprano recorder by myself. As we waited for the first lessons of each day, 4 of us with improvised instruments used to perform current songs such as Tobacco Road. In January 1963, I heard on Radio Luxembourg the Beatles singing Please Please Me, and like so many other people, was hooked on the ideas of being both in a band and of writing my own songs. 2 friends from Spratton were also friends at home. William Ray kept lizards in his room and was known as Basher because of his habit of saying "I'll basher." And Richard Wood, who seemed to eat nothing but ricicles and always had a more advanced Meccano set than me. I was glad to be invited to his house for bonfire nights because his dad, who owned a shop, always brought a tea chest full of fireworks home. Also, Richard had every Beatles record as it was released. He fancied himself as Ringo on his drum set in the loft, while I twanged a Meccano electric guitar. From September 1962, I became a day boy at Spratton Hall School, only to discover that my friends Jones, Clark, Law and Johnson were no longer there. That is still a mystery to this day. I began attending the Abington Church Pathfinder group and went with them for a weekend to Grendon Hall. One of the boys in my dormitory bought a copy of Parade on a trip to Peterborough. It was discovered by our leader, who quickly confiscated it. There was a competition to find 20 objects, and I was very happy to be in the same team as a girl named Sarah. On the last day, I took part in one of those plays which are performed in 3 different ways. It was about getting a coffin down the steps of a lighthouse, with the punchline from the keeper, "Well, we could always use the lift." I never did pluck up courage to really talk to Sarah, and later at Pathfinders Sarah did approach me with 2 of her friends to say that she liked me, but I was just too embarrassed to reply. Uncle Charlie had been my hero in my early years. In the 2 years before he left for Australia, he ran a lorry delivery service. I helped him out one day, and he very generously gave me £5 and a much needed sense of worth. The Pathfinder group organised day trips to London, where we visited theatres to see such musicals as Salad Days and The Sound of Music. This inspired me to buy the music for the shows and to learn the songs on piano. I asked my piano teacher, Mr. Jaeger, to show me how to play chords with the left hand. However, he insisted on the classical way of playing, and also continued to fall asleep during lessons. So I began to work out the chords for myself. An awareness of the wider world had begun with Mum encouraging me to save in a scrapbook newspaper cuttings of the first satellite, Sputnik, in 1957, and the first man, Yuri Gagarin, being launched into space in 1961. And despite being away at boarding school, news of both the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 and John Kennedy's assassination in 1963 filtered through. I began collecting postage stamps from around the world, and this hobby increased my interest in history and geography.